You can use technology, you can use, all different kind of levels of the extensiveness of the technology tools that you'll have available. But at the end of the day, human beings will still need to be part of that process.
Hi, I'm Karin Yuklea, and I'm here on the Feedzai Intelligence Network. I'm happy to have today Pawneet Abramowski with me. Welcome, Pawneet. I'm really happy to have you here. I think we've known each other for how long now?
10 years, over 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. Feels like it's passed in a moment.
Yeah.
So it's great to have you here. Compliance and innovation don't always go hand in hand, but you have actually been working kind of at the forefront of that intersection. And even when we met 10 years ago, I was working for a system integrator, and we were helping. You were working at a bank, and we were helping implement a new system, new AML systems. And your organization was back then very much focused on innovation and technology, and not just traditional banking and traditional anti-money laundering.
Yeah. I've been lucky enough to be in, different organizations, and traditional Wall Street organizations. So I have a very good understanding of what traditional institutions, financial institutions look for and want. And then I've been lucky enough to be in innovative banking space and having to kind of learn as I go along from great executives that I worked with, but also great technologists, my CIOs, my CTOs, my data teams, my tech teams, and then my partners like you, my firms, integrating partners that we worked with. I ended up learning from them, doing the innovative things early on, long before it was a trend to do those things. And I feel lucky that I've been able to learn that and work in those institutions that were ready to accept those types of, innovations.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about, what are typically the challenges? What are those barriers to innovation?
The challenge always is how much risk you take, right? How much risk, how much do you spread yourself? And then compliance role is to say, well, it's not good for, you or the organization to do this kind of risky type of activity. So I think that's what causes the friction. I have found myself in situations where, I've thought outside the box. If the organization that you work for is not making money, then you're not making money, right? Like at the end of the day, you have to learn and recognize that you get paid in an organization if your organization does well. So, it's not to say that support, criminal activity or bad behavior, but be smart enough to kind of ascertain what would be a good way to move things forward, how to like find ways to bring technology or operational efficiency or talking about making things work right for you, so you're working smarter, not harder, like we all know that. And compliance tends to cause that friction within organizations. So I think that really is a challenge that we've been facing for the last 30 plus years in the compliance sector, is because the go-to answer was, well, compliance is going to say no, so we can't do that. And that from your interactions working with all the different types of clients that you work with.
So how can compliance, I mean, compliance will just say no is a, common way that compliance is perceived by the business often. I think there is a desire from compliance professionals to not be seen that way, and to maybe, be seen as a partner to the organization. I guess the question is if realistically they have regulatory, responsibilities. How can they balance that? How can they become a partner to the business rather than
I
impediment?
Yeah, I'll tell you how. I think compliance needs to, not only know the regulations and how to operationalize those regulations and laws, but also at the same time learn the organization that you're in. And that's how you're going to be a partner to the business stakeholders. It's if you don't know what your business, strategy is in an organization, what your business partners want, and you're going to, stand there and say, okay, well, we have to do this monitoring, or we have to do this screening, or we have to do this onboarding. These are the challenges, and this is how much it's going to take. They're they live in numbers all day long. They don't want to hear your numbers. They want to hear from you, how are you going to meet them halfway? And I think the best compliance officers that I've met have been open to learning, And that means either you go to events and forums where you're receiving information. It's not always good to go to a forum where you're just learning about the same thing. It's good to learn about different things. So I think that what brings compliance to meet the stakeholders right in the middle, and then you can kind of figure out what works for both compliance and the business stakeholders.
One of the areas where we usually have a lot of friction with the customer experience and the compliance processes is onboarding and KYC and customer
Yeah.
due diligence during onboarding, after as well, but primarily during onboarding, it can be a very
Mhm.
cumbersome process. Let's talk about some ways that that process can be better, where compliance doesn't have to be interfering as much with customer experience, or what are actually, what are some mistakes to avoid
Yeah.
in that sense of like approaching CDD as
Yeah.
part of onboarding.
Look, at the end of the day, what we do helps and hopefully prevents some of the illicit activity, right? We're not going to be able to catch everyone and anyone in whatever we do. All of these organizations spend a lot of time and money and resources trying to do this, which is great, but you have to be smart about it. There are mistakes that are made. There are, of course, egregious actions, and we have a lot of organizations that have paid severe amount of fines for violating that, where they're not even following what the basics are. I mean, I feel safer if the organization that I'm banking with or I'm transacting with is asking me the basic questions to make sure, they know who I am. I hope Mickey Mouse doesn't go in and, tries to open an account on my behalf. But, those are some of the simplistic ways. But, when you start to get into complex business transactions or complex, types of products and services in organizations, that due diligence has to meet that level. You can't say it can be completely frictionless. You can make the experience smoother, but the back and forth of getting the information should not be a problem for a client that's really wanting to have an account in an organization, conduct a transaction. They should be relatively comfortable with wanting to offer that. Why are they being hesitant? I think those are the things that go through my mind. But ultimately, you can come up with a process that is easy. I've gone to institutions where I provide the information. My experience of opening up accounts is and these are all like large financial institutions, small institutions, credit unions, you name it. And I have accounts for me, my family, my kids, everyone, right? Like we all have different types of accounts. So I've gone through all the different types of onboarding kind of processes, not only for personal and business accounts, but also for other types of trust or other types of complex transactions. So I've done that from a personal perspective, and I don't have a problem in providing that kind of information. But a lot of people do, and I think that's what kind of opened up in the air for a lot of people that that person didn't have, or that party did not have a good experience. So how can we make it better? Who are you? What are you going to do with us? And why are you going to do this? And I don't want to know like every single transaction. I should have technology on the back end. And I'm a big proponent of using technology to kind of help with that effort. So I don't have to have, 500 people doing that.
When things take longer or when a bank asks questions, I know why. And I am also like, I take it as like, I like what you
Yeah.
said, I feel safer when I know that they're looking out for my safety. But I think a lot of people don't feel that way. They feel like it's intrusive, or, they're under some kind of suspicion that they feel like it's being implied that they're doing something wrong, even though they're not doing anything wrong. A lot of customers getting that negative reaction to being asked questions.
Well, I mean, you have to you have to look at those customers. Like, why do you feel that it's an intrusion? We could go into another conversation, which is on privacy. We need to work on that. You look at Europe and other countries in Asia. Their privacy legislations certainly dictate how much and how little they get to keep and take from their customers, right? We in the United States are certainly getting better at it. State by state, we have better regulations. So they're trying to unify. If you used to put your money in a bank or a financial institution or a credit union, whatever, they prefer digital banks because their experience is much easier. But The experience is much easier is because they're asking you little or nothing. It's do you feel comfort in that, or do you want to have some guardrails in place? We don't drive cars without driver's licenses, and when you do drive a car without a driver's license, you get pulled over, right? Similarly, compliance field is just like that, right? You need to have guardrails in place.
And I also think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and sometimes that can really create some strange perceptions. And I actually thinking of, a few months ago, there was a sort of a discourse on social media and in various forums about politically exposed persons.
Yeah.
And I mean, why don't we start by, just in case somebody doesn't know, let's talk first about what politically exposed persons actually are, and then what happened with that public discourse.
For the public discourse, yes. It's a person that's serving in a political capacity, head of a state, person that is a political figure, governors, your mayors, your, elected officials, their family members, because unfortunately, when money has moved, illicit activity money has moved from various dictators and other criminal actors. They've used the channels of their family members and close associates, kind of like the key definition. That doesn't mean that they're a bad person just because you are an elected official. You have access to information. You have access to funds that you raise, and then you have your personal funds. That really is, essentially to making sure that you're not taking public proceeds and putting them in your pocket, right?
It's just a risk. I mean, it's not saying anybody is a bad person or a good person or any kind of judgment on their specific politics, right? It's just a matter of saying
Yes.
we are considering that position, having that kind of access to certain kind of government power to be a higher risk. And it's in the AML world, there's some additional process around higher risk
Right.
customers.
They interpreted it that it was a political persecution, so
Yeah.
therefore their accounts were being closed by financial institutions for that reason, for whatever their political affiliation was, and that's absolutely, bonkers.
But regular people that, are not compliance professionals and have never heard of this term before, and now somebody they follow, some social media influencer or podcaster or, politician is saying this, they are likely to believe them. And now if they're being asked certain questions or you know, being,
Yeah.
their bank account opening is delayed or something, they now believe that they are being targeted for their personal political beliefs. But yeah, this is to say that like the business has to consider the experience, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense
Right.
professionally. And so some things like that, for example, if the bank doesn't need to ask you the question and instead they can just, search for you
Yeah.
in available
Various
data
databases.
sources, they're doing the same thing, but they're not, they're not interfering directly with the customer experience, or they try not to. As long as they do it quickly enough.
I think you see the banks are being smarter about it. I mean, early on, when the U.S. Anti-money laundering regulations came into play after 9/11. I mean, essentially, a lot of things changed after 9/11, right? So the USA Patriot Act came into place, and the requirements were also made rigorous, right? So that changed the way information was being gathered. At that time, I can see that there was a lot more customer friction, and now that process has gotten much better because they're trying to do those things behind the scenes. They do ask that question upfront is in the complex deals and the complex transactions. So they're trying to be smart about it, but everything takes an effort, right? So it is moving, a lot of customer information through a lot of those technological channels that they have.
Yeah, and I think we have access to more information than ever, but there's so much of it and so many options on what to use, how
Yeah.
to use it.
Right.
And as you said, if the compliance team really understands the business, they can still manage the risk effectively while like balancing the customer experience.
Yeah.
But if they don't understand the business, they're always going to be the ones that are coming in and like throwing some kind of massive problem in the middle
Right.
of, the attempt of the bank to do its
I mean, the
business.
first thing I say, to anyone that wants to be in this compliance profession, you have to educate yourself on the institution that you're in, and especially what products and services that they're offering. It doesn't matter whether you're working in, a registered investment advisor or a fintech or a bank. You have to know what they do. right? Like what other products and services, and then you can help them.
So we kind of touched on PEP from the angle of the customer experience, but I mean, typically when we do when PEP screening is done behind the scenes, not by asking the customers. We do, it's part of screening of various watch lists. But there are other types of lists, much more serious, of sanctions lists and just sanctions programs. So I thought we should talk a little bit about the challenges around that, because that's a much less, like, that's not about the customer experience or something gray area. This is a much
Well,
more
that
prescriptive.
actually is an extension of the foreign policy of whatever country you're in. So sanctions typically is the extension of the foreign policy. The United States is actually one of the largest issuer of sanctions. Their list is the largest in comparison to European Union, Asia, Middle East. They really look to the U.S. as a leader in what to include in in their sanctions list. When they don't have it, they actually do use the U.S. sanctions list, and I've actually had to tell them, like, you realize that's the U.S. foreign policy, not your foreign policy, right? U.S. does not want to do business with person A or vessel B, but you probably would want to. They're like, no, 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 we don't want to.
Just in case.
Just in case, because everyone is ultimately everyone's transacting through the U.S. financial system, so no one wants to have that issue that they're dealing with. Have to explain, oh, we are using this, so we don't agree with you. So they lot of smaller countries actually rely on the U.S. OFAC list.
I'm wondering if we might see more divergence in the foreign policies of countries these days. There's a lot of political upheaval.
It is it's a foreign policy, right? So, and foreign policy, whether it's through diplomatic ways, whether it's through your official positions, whatever those channels are, it changes. And so the sanctions kind of regime also changes.
And the sanctions is a particularly international business. It's not only in the context of each country has their policy, and then depending on where they're doing business, they have to factor in the policy of their counterparties. A lot of names on the list are from specific cultures that are being targeted by a specific political direction or reason. And it poses a lot of challenges for the compliance professionals trying to deal with that, right?
Yeah, compliance professionals and the businesses that it impacts, right? If you have an emerging markets business, that's a challenge because you're going to have very unique names and or common names in the region. We call the lingo false positives, right? Like your false positives, you have partial matches, and that's where a lot of time is spent. My name, combination of my name is being picked up and hit up against multiple different lists. So it's going to create a lot of alerts and hits, right? So, and that those have to be looked at. And that's where I welcome the early, adoption of AI technology.
Everybody's very excited about the potential of AI and machine learning. I mean, not least of all the criminals, of course, who have, as usual, are early adopters
Yes, of course.
every technology. I think compliance professionals are also eager, and banks are very eager to use technology. But we have some challenges applying machine learning in the context of compliance and anti-money laundering that are not always the same if you're applying it to other areas of your business. Just, of course, the biggest one in the mind of every compliance officer is the regulators and regulatory acceptance and regulatory scrutiny.
Yeah.
And so, like, what's been your experience in, what is the regulatory attitude shifting, and how can banks still satisfy their regulatory
I think
requirements?
it's going to continue to shift in the coming years, but I think over the years I've found if you have a dialogue with your regulators, you can explain, but you have to be confident. Again, going back to what I said, know what you're working on, know what your products are. So if you can't be the advocate for your organization, knowing your products and services, knowing your technology that you're using, then who else is going to do that? Because you're going to be the spokesperson and telling that to the regulators. What's the benefit of this technology? What's the advantage to the compliance function if the utilization of technology is applied here? And I, as a compliance officer, have had those conversations with regulators, and it's educating them, right? They're not the enemies. Look, they're just doing their job. But what you have to do is set things straight, and not everyone has the personality to do that with the regulators, right? Because it's seen as a somewhat adversarial sometimes. So you can make it adversarial, but you can also make it advantageous for both the regulator and for yourself.
I think something you said was key, that you have to be confident about it yourself. And I think the more complex technology, and again, especially when we're starting to get into the artificial intelligence. I mean, to be honest, I am in the technology business, and there's a lot I don't understand.
Yeah.
I'm not a data scientist like some of our team members
So
are.
even you're saying that. Like,
So
wow.
I'm saying this, and then compliance professionals are certainly not supposed to be that technical traditionally. Like, I don't know if this means, compliance profession needs to become more tech savvy, and more tech savvy people need to be in there, or are there other ways? Because it's when we everybody tends to fall back on simple rules because simple rules are easy to explain. They may not be very effective,
Yes.
but they are simple to explain, and you can confidently explain them to your regulators, and your regulator can confidently understand them. And if we are not, most of us, quite at that level of, we're not quants or data scientists, we're talking about things that we may not be able to fully
Yeah.
understand.
No, but I think, look, it's like I look at it this way, and I like to put practical, things into play it as examples. Like everyone can explain A, B, C, D, like, right? That's your alphabet, right? Like everyone knows that. So simple rules, I think, fall in that category because that's the foundational pieces. But you have to go to the next level. You have to make, 2-letter words, 3-letter words, and then go on to complex letter words. And I think it's the same thing when you look at, the technology, whether it's, the rules and or kind of the advancement with machine learning and more specific, or the way in which the monitoring is done, the way in which screening is done, the algorithms behind the scenes have to like be, more than 2-letter words, because that's the only way you're going to be able to make a sentence out of, out of things. And I think that's what everyone forgets. Like, yes, because it's easy to say, your alphabets, but you have to move on to the next level. And I think that's where we are. There's something that you said that was an interesting comment to me, Karin. I think where you said, do compliance officers or professionals need to be technologists, or do technologists need to be more compliance? I think it's a combination of the two. I don't claim to be a data scientist, or I don't write code. I don't do any of that. But I can carry out a conversation. I can ask the inquisitive questions and get to learn more about what is it that the tech team is doing. It doesn't help me if I don't ask those questions. I love it when, when I'm working with, like, implementation teams or integration teams, and with my clients, and when I was in-house in the banks, it was those conversations, because I loved it when they asked me questions. Can you explain KYC to me? Or can you explain why do you need this, calculation here for risk analysis? It's asking those questions. There's no, like, it's basic thing which a teacher tells you. No question is a bad question, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are just so intimidated that they're not asking the questions, and nobody's gonna think less of them for asking and trying to understand. And instead, sometimes people choose to just not touch something because it seems intimidating, and they're embarrassed about asking. I mean, and to be honest, as I've been mostly on the technology side, I have to say that I often have this the opposite challenge, which is making the technology teams understand compliance, because a lot of it doesn't intuitively make sense as to what you're trying to get out of doing the compliance, like the objectives of the problem. And it only makes sense if you understand regulations and their purpose, or at least, how they're being applied in
Well,
practice.
because they're binary, right?
Yeah, it's like we get, I mean, I want to say some types of crime are more intuitively, people can understand why it's bad or why you're
Yeah.
trying to prevent it. Okay. So, like, we work also on fraud in Feedzai, of
Yeah.
course. And people understand fraud is someone stealing your money, and you can know it's a crime because the money's gone and someone is
Yeah.
saying that their money's been stolen. And in compliance, we don't have that kind of black and white clarity. We know we need to manage certain higher risk entities. We know we're overall striving to disrupt money laundering, but it's part of a big picture kind of pattern. It's not necessarily an immediate confirmation of the crime or anything like
It's not
that.
it's not an instant gratification, like we were talking about, like, with news and information having instantaneous, kind of like, uh, building up and like say, okay, yes, I got it, or I have the information. Sometimes, you have to tell the stories of why is it important. It doesn't look, in your daily life, you'll never come in contact with a cartel member, or
I hope.
I hope not, or you're not going to come in contact with, this complex Ponzi scheme, right? Like those are the examples that like when I have those conversations, I literally pull, things from the headlines and say, okay, you remember this? Maybe I'll send you the link for this. Look at this. This is what we're trying to get to. This is what, you can't see in the black and white of the numbers, but the reason we're trying to come up with this calculation or the way in which this approach for this rule, what we're trying to identify is this type of activity. And a lot of times, if you are able to learn and, learn the topologies of what those, scenarios were, you're able to come up with the rules that you say, right? Like for monitoring and identifying or preventing, or at least, attempting to prevent something like that happening at your door.
It does make it challenging, I would say, for the technical teams when they can't know if the answer is right. Like in technology, we kind of like it's a 0 or a 1. Like
Yeah.
is it correct? And we don't know if it's correct. We just know that the experts or the subject matter experts think this looks like something we were looking for, but we don't actually know if it's what we were looking for in anti-money laundering a lot of times. It's a double-edged sword, but it also feels like there is, we must learn how to use the new technology because, as we say, the criminals definitely have. So
I use it. And again, I'm probably the outlier here, the compliance, professional that uses all different types of technology tools, to kind of better myself. To if I'm going to attempt to come up with some sort of, guardrails or requirements or controls, I can't come up with that if I don't know how to interact with it or operate it.
I think earlier you talked about the driver's license, and I actually oddly used this example in some discussions lately as well about, actually it was about regulation of the internet, but it applies also to AI,
Applies anywhere.
which is there didn't used to be such a thing as driver's license. When they first invented cars, they
Yeah.
didn't know they would need licenses for them. And right now we're struggling on how to regulate the internet and how to regulate AI, and it feels like, it's infringing on innovation. But the reality is we have to have driver's license so cars can be driven safely. And if there weren't any, you would have so many accidents that nobody would want to ever drive a car or
Yeah.
get anywhere near a road. So some amount of regulation, smart regulation, enables innovation, not the other way around.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, look, I think there's always an extreme of everything, and overregulation is never good for innovation, never good for even the professionals that are tasked with managing it, right? So I think having a right balanced approach to regulation is the kind of the sweet spot.
Yeah, I mean, there's gonna be some trial and error, and part of what's a little alarming right now is the speed at which the technology is moving. It feels like we are not fast enough to keep up. I mean, we as a society,
Yeah.
it takes trial and error, and it takes humans some time to wrap their head around new things. But the technology is actually evolving so fast right now.
And I think we also, in the U.S. specifically, I think we remained silent on the digital assets regulations, and I think that also hurt us. We definitely lost a few years because we just were not, proactively looking to put the guardrails in place, put the requirements. We had basics, and some state by state, some states did that, which was fine, but it doesn't foster for a national approach. It does not foster for a global, innovation.
Well, I think with the digital assets, the crypto, it felt a very sudden shift, and I think this happens a lot of times in the regulatory framework from there's no regulation because we don't know what this new thing is, to suddenly let's crack down on everybody that isn't up to a very high standard. And I feel like that happens in all kinds of
Yeah.
industries and products and services that are relatively new, and it's not a most helpful. I feel like that's not maybe the best way to go about
I
it.
agree with you. It's not the best way because you tend to, either your pendulum goes one way, to one extreme, or it goes swings to the other extreme, and you have to find the balance there, right? And you want to keep things in front of you. Like, why would you want to like throw things underground or away from you? I mean, we've had the best innovation in the U.S. Apple. It happened here. Microsoft, it happened here, right? Those are just two examples. There's so many. Google happened here. It's because those Hewlett Packard, the basic computer here.
And people from all over the world come here to innovate
Exactly,
here. This
exactly.
is true.
Right. When you don't have that environment that's, kind of fostering for innovation, it becomes challenging, and you're watching a like kind of a drain of all of that away from here. So, in that regard, I think it would be nice to have all of that back happening here so we can have the next big idea,
Next
right?
big ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe the next big ideas will be in the area of compliance.
Who knows? You never know.
So I wanted to talk with you a little bit more about specifically sanctions, but not so much just about the sanctions program, but about sanctions screening technology. Like, how do we actually, I think for a lot of people, before they get into that business, it seems really simple. You have a list of sanctioned people or sanctioned companies or sanctioned countries, and you have to look to see, make sure it's not, you're not doing business. It sounds really easy. Like, we're just going to screen our customer. We're just going to look at their name and we're going to compare it to the list. And it's really simple. And everybody I know, that once they get into it, they realize it's really not that simple at all.
That was a tricky question. It is not that simple. I wish it was that simple. It could be, but it doesn't end up being like that. So I'll share something with you. And this is like me as a compliance officer, as a sanctions officer in a financial institution. We were in a very like transformation type of period where we were going from kind of like the basic screening processes to an enhancement of the screening process, and then over migration into a new system completely. So when I first got there, I looked at, okay, what are they doing for screening? Very basic, simple. They had the list. They were pulling from OFAC's website. Very simple. They upload the list on a daily basis, or very frequently during a week, and then companies go in and pull it from there. So that's what the tech team was doing. They were pulling it, but the way in the screening logic, it has to have logic, right? You talk about math, and you talk about kind of the tech processes. So our tech team had come up with that. It was very simple, but it was very rudimentary. It really was not like, so if you have, yes, John Smith is easy to screen, right? Because John and Smith, easy peasy, done. Where you start to get into complexity is when you have kind of cultural nuances. You have a name like mine, which is not that easy. So we had gone through an enhancement process. So we kind of took the logic of the screening list, and made it a little bit more kind of thoughtful. It had two stages to it. It needed to look at it, whether the name was John, Jon, John, like, variations of it, how people spell their names and all. So we enhanced that whole process. Perfect. Super duper awesome. Now we're going to the migration stage, right? Into the new platform. Few months later, we've gone through a whole rigorous process of migrating to a new system, which we actually came up with. It has a more sophisticated way of like list matching, name matching, fuzziness of like the name, how the name is spelled, and the sounds and things like that. Whether you have a ethnic name, whether you have a simplistic name, we go into the migrate into the new system, and lo and behold, we have a hit. The name was a very interesting name. It was a combination, and we learned as a combination of someone from Argentina. Okay, all right, that's fine. But it was an Argentinian Latin American name with a combination of Jewish names. Well, and after World War II, you had a huge population of Jewish people that moved to Argentina. So this individual was being screened in the sanction screening tool. His name, I think, and I'm just going to make up like a combination of the names, but it was Jose Andreas Rosenberg, Schmidt. And the only reason the sanction screening tool actually would have other watch lists as well. You're not just screening for sanctions, right? You're screening for PEPs. You're screening for criminal actors and things like that. The reason his name was on the list was he was a politically exposed person, so a relative of the ruling political party's leader, and was on trial in the US because it was part of the FIFA scandal. That's why he was on the list. Smartly enough, the individual used a combination of their Latin American name and their Jewish name. So the first time it ran through our enhanced logic that we had worked on, it kind of picked it up, but then it said, no, that's not possible to have that kind of combination of a name, Jose and Rosenberg, right? Like it just does not sound right. So it determined that it's a false positive. Fast forward to when we moved to the new system, because it had a couple of different logical stages, it identified that this individual actually was the same person. So we had that. So we had the hit because of the fact that the individual had used a combination of their names. And that's really what you're supposed to be like looking for in the screening process.
Yeah, I think that's an example of when a certain in positive intent of a technology to understand cultures and apply that as part of the decision, because in this case it's relevant because we're trying, a lot of matching the right people is understanding the variations of names and the specific way different cultures
Yeah.
structure the names, how many last names, how many first names, middle names,
Yeah.
and so on. So the intent is to do better by understanding cultures, but in this case, when there was more than one culture in the name, the system got completely confused about it and basically eliminated a strong match.
You can use technology, you can use, all different kind of levels of the extensiveness of the technology tools that you'll have available, but at the end of the day, human beings will still need to be part of that process. So like, those that say, well, technology is going to, replace us or all of this, it doesn't. The fact that I knew that information, I mean, until we get to a point where, those tools that you're talking about can kind of connect the dots that, hey, after World War II, there was a whole big, Jewish population in Argentina. Therefore, the name could be a combination of individual that is of descent from Jewish and the Argentinian, parents. That's why he has that name. That level of kind of analysis and deduction is, I think, a while away, but
I mean, I think it feels like it's far away, especially, just what's currently being used in the industry. But I think it's not as far away as it seems in a way. I mean, we just need to have enough data and people to train, because some of this, I think the machine learning is capable of mimicking the humans, but it needs a lot of learning data and like
yeah.
asking the right questions, the right prompts. Honestly, when I sit with sanctions analysts and they go through how they do things, it is very much not rocket science how they triage the alerts. And
Yeah.
I can't really have a good reason about why machine learning couldn't do what they do.
Yeah. That a lot of institutions have utilized, AI-based solutions over the last few years and have been able to kind of share that with their regulatory partners, their regulators, to say this is helping us kind of get through that massive wall of thousands of alerts. Yes, you can train that the technology, the AI solution in the back end to be able to kind of, you know, grasp this data. And you can actually put human beings where they need to be doing the analysis, right? So a lot of the kind of like the grunt work can be done by the utilization of technology. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it may be sooner rather than that far future that I'm hoping that it isn't.
You'll be okay, Pawneet. You're going to teach everybody how to use the machine learning.
I hope so.
We all, I mean, I honestly would say, though, that there's been a lot of technology revolutions in human history, and people always think that humans aren't going to be necessary anymore, but it's not that. Humans just get a different type of job, and whether it's like training or supervising or using the new machine technology to do different things.
I always tell when I teach, I say I was there at the dawn of the internet, right? So my students look at me like, "What do you mean?" I said, "I've gone through all the different technology phases, so you have to like learn and adapt to all of that." So I think it's fantastic that we get to see all of this happen in front of our eyes. My kids and that generation, they're being brought up in this technology, so they don't know what the world looked like before. I do, and it was nice, but I'm actually thankful that I have a lot more power in my hands and my phone than I did back, when I walked around with my first computer, which I had to like lug from the store into my house. So same amount of, maybe more computing power in my phone today than I did, 35 years ago.
We kind of grew up in the transition time and adapted. I hope we are not too old to adapt to the new
No,
role
I
of
don't think
AI.
so. No, absolutely not. I think I am very excited, and I think there is a lot more use in the sanction space and the screening space for the technology, because I think it can kind of um, eliminate a lot of the pain that the compliance professionals and the business feels, because it delays a lot of the things they want to accomplish, move things forward, and or not have to reach out to a customer to ask a silly question. Is your name X or Y or Z, whatever it is, and is it a combination of those, and then you're trying to get a history lesson on where they're coming from.
Especially, I mean, customers rightly will be sensitive about their culture and their racial background being used to basically profile them
Yeah.
just because there's someone with a similar name on the list.
Yes.
But on the other hand, like on sanctions, we're actually dealing with in many processes we can like avoid racial or demographic bias, but in sanctions we kind of can't avoid bias completely because many of the sanctions lists are targeting
Right.
specific regions and therefore specific cultures and
Yes.
backgrounds. So it's a challenging game, and the less we can, I
Yeah.
think for the banks, the less you can upset the customers needlessly.
Needless. No, I
Uh,
agree, and I think using the tools, the technology-based tools is the way to go for that, to eliminate and actually make the human beings do the things that they should be doing.
yeah, and I mean, honestly, especially I mean, not just in sanctions, but just the alert fatigue that humans go through from seeing the same false positives 100 times a day.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, that's the other thing. Machines don't get fatigued. I mean,
Yeah.
there's other challenges, but they're not going to get tired. They
Yeah.
can see the 100 matches a day and still be just as sharp about
Yeah.
each one of them.
Yes. No, I agree, and that's the piece that I'm actually looking forward to seeing happen within our sector.
Puneet, so thank you so much for coming here today and giving us all of these insights about really how compliance teams can innovate and support the business. Any parting thoughts?
No, thank you for having me. I think this has been a wonderful conversation. We could keep on talking. There's so many different angles that we can kind of slice and dice this conversation, but certainly appreciate the opportunity to kind of be on this forum with you and share my insights over the last 30 plus years.
Thank you so much.